Hi, my name is Stacey Bell-Lynn. I spent 20 years working in local news, and 13 years ago, I married an NFL player turned coach, Anthony Lynn, and joined the world of NFL superwives. I've always loved hearing about the life behind the headlines. It's where you find the common thread that connects us. That's what I want to do here. My husband played and coached for the Broncos and 49ers. He's currently the running backs coordinator for the Commanders. We've moved 6 times across the country for his various jobs. When I first met my husband, I didn't know anything about football. I just loved the commercials and the snacks. Well, trust me, that's changed. In my new NFL world, the wives became my family and confidants. It is a sisterhood that transcends teams and rivalries. In each episode, I'll talk with a significant other of a player or coach, the football wives who hold it all together. We'll get real and give you a behind-the-scenes glimpse of it all. This is the world that I want to share with you. Welcome to Super Wives of the NFL, their inside stories. Let's kick it off. Hey, I'm Stacey Bell-Lynn. Welcome back to another edition of Red Zone Queens with NFL sideline reporter Haley Elwood. Hey, Haley.
Hey, Stacey. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. All right, so let's dive right in and we will talk about our game, the Commanders. I don't even know where to start. A loss to the Seahawks and then Jaden gets hurt.
Oh, that is just this game. I think sometimes we sort of forget is just so cruel in a sense, and I don't know if that's really the right word to use, but it's just so tough how a team, for instance, what the Commanders have done, kind of trying to get through the season. Jaden's gotten hurt. Jaden Daniels has been hurt at some points, had to kind of take a step back. And then finally it's like, okay, he's back, and then suffers this crazy elbow injury, which to be honest, looked much, much worse in the moment. And I'll say this, having watched Khalil Mack go through, I think, a pretty similar thing earlier this season, when that play initially happened, you think the worst. And I mean, there were players crying on the sidelines and down on one knee. And then I don't want to say to have it only be a dislocation, I think is a good thing, but it's remarkable though, a couple days later, removed from what initially happened on Sunday, to kind of see, okay, maybe it's not as terrible, but it is still really, really tough. And I think it almost goes to show you that anything can happen, good or bad, during an NFL season. And we're so used to kind of, you and I have been doing this now for the whole season and talking about these similar teams and these same teams, but all it takes is just one play, just one freak play to truly change the trajectory of a team's entire season. And so that is just such a tough loss. And I think everyone feels for Commanders fans. And that was a game that had such an amazing uniform matchup, with the Commanders wearing their kind of like old school, like Super Bowl era uniforms, I think is what they're called. And then the Seahawks wearing their throwbacks. It felt like a throwback type game when you were watching it, but man, it is just tough. And I think everyone is obviously just sending the best to Jaden Daniels for his recovery, and also just for the rest of the Commanders and what they can do the rest of the season as well.
And I'll tell you, being there at the game, and you're right, it looked a lot worse than what it was. But when he first went down, we were watching it and it looked like he grabbed his knee. And my brother-in-law just went, so you're right. So 2 days later, it's you don't want to say just the elbow, but I think there was a collective, especially in the stands, of it's his knee, he's grabbing his knee. And so it could have been worse. It's not great, but you still feel like, okay, it could have been a lot worse.
I think sometimes too, we're at home, for instance, I'm at home watching this game, you're in the stadium. And I just would love to get your perspective on, because I've been obviously in person at games where guys have suffered really catastrophic injuries, and just the air just kind of gets sucked out of the entire building. And it is really, really crazy to me, and you could speak to this obviously, but then for the players on the field to just sort of compartmentalize and have to move on literally to the next play. But I would just love, from your perspective, just to kind of hear what that was like, and then how the sort of team kind of had to regroup from that point forward too.
I mean, what was that? It was almost the end of the fourth quarter. And, it was such a blowout loss. People were already leaving. The stands were kind of empty. But when it happened, it's like you said, it just sucked the air out of the stadium. And it's, people hands over faces, praying, hands going up, like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. It's just, I don't want to be dramatic, because it's not a funeral that's being dramatic, but it was just like, oh, what now? I can't believe this happened. And then you see the players and someone said, oh, they're bringing the card out. And you just, it's like the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think at that point, like, honestly, like a lot of fans and people in the stands just kind of checked out and they're like, all right, I'm out, or I give up, but the players like have 5 more minutes of football,
Right.
it's like, I don't know. And then you go into the family tent afterwards. And once again, it's just doom and gloom. It's just, it takes a minute to just shake it off. You don't just like, oh, okay, go, now we got to go home. Like, it's like, dang, I can't believe that really just happened.
Yeah. It's interesting when you bring up the family tent, because that's something that I'm not sure a lot of people know, that really, depending on if you are the home team or an away team, there's a family section outside of every game that allows family members, friends of players or coaches to sort of loiter, if you will, and wait to see their loved ones after the game. And you just mentioned it, like, you guys then kind of all go to that area, but you have this sort of cloud that's hanging over. And I
Yes.
remember back in, oh gosh, was it 22, whatever the first Amazon Prime game was, where the Chargers went to Kansas City and Justin Herbert suffers this rib injury at the very end of the game. And just, again, everything kind of gets sucked out because you didn't know how serious it was. And I went to the family section and his dad is there. And I think he had other family members there. And you just sort of forget sometimes that these guys are true humans at the end of the day, with loved ones and friends and family members who are all there and who might have been there also in person to see. And so it is just kind of, it's tough. It's sort of just one of the tough realities of this game that we all love to watch and talk about, but are always sort of reminded every now and then that there's definitely just a cruel side to it.
And I'll say this and then we'll move on to another topic. But I had been watching earlier because we had the night game. So I had been watching the 49ers. They were in New York playing the Giants. And the commentators had said that, Luke and Christian's parents were going to drive from New York that afternoon to the game here in DC. And I thought, well, that's going to be tough. I don't know if they're going to make it. But we always see them in the family tent. And so it dawned on me afterwards, Luke got hurt.
Yes.
And so I thought, oh, they're not in the family tent because, hopefully they got here in time enough and they're somewhere with Luke. So it's, it was a crazy day.
Yeah.
All right.
Such a tough one.
Moving on. All right. So the big games of this week, what's on tap? What are we looking at?
There's a lot. I was going through the week 10 schedule and there's really about 5 games off the top of just quickly kind of scanning it that really stand out to me. And I'm just going to, I guess, kind of go in order of just time frame here. So if we start earlier on Sunday, the 10 a.m. slate, if you're on Pacific time like me, I'm looking at Ravens at Vikings. And we talked a lot about the Ravens last week before their Thursday night football game. They ended up beating the Dolphins very handedly. Lamar Jackson was back, 4 touchdowns, like no big deal. He's just back in the saddle. And I think the interesting thing to me was they were discussing during that game that the Ravens are still favored to win the AFC North, which seems just bananas when you're 3-5 and the Steelers right now are 5-3 in that division. But that's just the impact, I think, of what one player can have on a team. And you certainly saw that in that one game. So can the Ravens keep things going? And then on the flip side, you look at the Vikings and they last week beat the Detroit Lions, which I'm not sure anyone kind of thought was going to happen, especially with JJ McCarthy returning after he had missed all that time with his ankle injury. The Vikings defense too. I mean, I was at the Rams, oh my gosh, who did they play last week? Now I'm blanking. Saints game, excuse me. Yeah, last week. And every time I'd look up at the TV before the game started, it just looked like the Vikings defense was just smothering Jared Goff and the Lions. So can they kind of have that same effect on Lamar Jackson, or as elusive as he is something going to break there? So that's just a really interesting matchup to me that also kicks off the Sunday slate. And then the next kind of early Sunday game is, to me, Patriots at Buccaneers. And these are 2 teams with just really good records right now. And I think we've talked a lot about the Colts. They obviously lost this past week, but the Patriots, to me, are a team that's just very, very surprising for what they've been able to do this season. I'm not sure anyone expected them to be 7-2 at week 10 and also be leading the AFC East. I mean, everyone kind of assumed that was Buffalo's division, just kind of here you go on a silver platter, because that's kind of what it's been. But the Bills are actually a game behind them right now. So that's going to be just a really, really fascinating game to me in terms of, can New England really sort of keep this going, or the Buccaneers, who are now coming off a bye, do they kind of have to get back into it? And are they kind of, looking to make, keep their kind of magic going? But I'm just so pleasantly surprised by the Patriots. But I don't think, though, when you look at the type of coach who they hired and Mike Vrabel, it's really maybe not that surprising, because he's just one of those coaches who, former player, won championships, and he's always going to get the best out of his guys, I think.
Okay. All right. And I think we are playing, which I think, and I, hate to say this, was going to be a big game. Like now I don't know so much but we are facing the Lions, which was going to be a bit of a rematch from the game last year. So I think we've got the 3:30, 4:30 game.
Yeah. So that was obviously going to be, a rematch of, a just very, very massive NFC playoff game last year. But, that's the thing, right? And these are sometimes what happens in the middle of a season where that looked like a good game. And I'm sure when the schedule makers and the networks were trying to pick games, they were like, sold. Lions, Commanders, absolutely. But then we mentioned it, one kind of injury happens, and all of a sudden the whole trajectory of the game changes. And so that's just not going to be maybe as, I don't want to discount Marcus Mariota or anything, but it's just not the same when your starting quarterback isn't your starting quarterback and isn't playing up against the starting quarterback of the other team, and you're not really getting the same rematch as you had last year. It just carries a little different weight.
Okay, so let's talk about that said, the flex and flexing the schedule, and you really understand better than I do how that works, because we have some 8 o'clock games coming up, and that's happened before, where a team has an 8 o'clock game, a Sunday night game, and maybe they're not doing as well, and they're flexed out of that time slot to an earlier game. So how does that all work?
Okay, so flex scheduling is essentially the way that the NFL has allowed either teams that might not or might be getting hotter as the season goes on to get some primetime love, or to your point, maybe move some teams out of a primetime game that aren't necessarily doing as well, maybe because of an injury, maybe just, who knows, things happened and the season isn't going as great as they planned. So I looked it up, and the NFL started this back in 2006, and it basically was to just get better quality matchups on what was initially just Sunday night football, but now Monday night games can be flexed and Thursday night games can be flexed. And it all has to happen within a certain time frame. The Sunday night games, we've been in a flex situation with them starting back in week 5. That's when games can start to be flexed in and out of Sunday night football. We're now in week 10. So nothing has obviously happened for this week. The Sunday night game this week is Steelers at Chargers. So that is definitely a big one that NBC and the NFL decided we are definitely keeping that one there. But when you look forward, are there maybe some games that could be moved? So when a flex happens, what happens? And I think that's the question. And basically, the NFL gives teams the notice, and it says from weeks 14 to 17, pretty much you have about a week or so to know that you will be getting flexed. And they usually make the announcement sometimes on Sunday Night Football, or on like the Tuesday before the game, you'll hear, or the following week, like, hey, this switch is going to happen. And so essentially what they do is they take that matchup that was on Sunday Night Football and replace it with another matchup. And I went back through 2024 schedule, and there were, I'm not going to count week 18 or week 17 because there were some weird like Saturday games, but games were flexed in week 8, week 9, and week 11, which was actually the first Thursday night football flex, which I was part of with the Broncos Chargers. And that is a whole crazy thing, because if you are flexing a team in or out of Thursday night, you have to tell that team no later than 21 days prior to that game. And so I can't do math right now. I'm not going to try to do it and figure out where 21 would put us. But I think that is obviously to give teams enough time to prep, because a Thursday game you were playing on a short week. And also it's courtesy to the fans too, because these fans pay a lot of money to go and attend these games. And I think initially when the flex scheduling was being discussed with Thursday night, it was like, how the heck is this going to happen? But apparently they determined that about 3 weeks is the sweet spot. And I think it used to be 28 days and then they bumped it down to 21. So now it's about 3 weeks time. And then there's obviously Monday Night Football flexing too that can happen. And that's a little bit of again, like a, ticky-tack sort of time and date situation where they need to give obviously teams advance notice. But I think, to your point, depending on where the Commanders fall or maybe some of these other teams, and I haven't looked too far ahead, but, it's funny that here we are in week 10 and nothing has really been flexed in or out of those primetime spots. Where, like I said, last year, looking at the schedule, we had flexes in weeks 8 and 9. But I certainly believe moving forward, especially also when you look at teams maybe like the Patriots and maybe the Colts, who were not probably given many primetime games. And, that's another thing. When the season starts, I believe you are allotted a maximum. You can reach a max of like 5 primetime games, I want to say, between all 3, Thursday, Sunday, Monday games. And, you have the Cowboys always get it, the Chiefs, the Bills, these hot teams that are always, big draws are always going to end up in those primetime games. But every year there's always these teams that surprise us all with their records and end up kind of, again, getting a little bonus to play in those primetime slots via flexing because you're the only game on at that point and everyone gets to watch you on the national stage.
Okay, interesting. I will say, I've said many times, I'm not a fan of night games, but it is an ego boost when you get flexed to a night game, and then it's a little blow to your ego when you're flexed out of a night game.
That's a really good point. I always remember talking like years ago when I was interviewing players and a flex happened or, they were flexed into a game. They would always equate it to like Friday Night Lights and it being their kind of high school game because usually unless you are in part-time, you're not playing at night anymore in the NFL. So they always kind of got that sort of like high school-esque like Friday Night Light boost from it. But yeah, if you're flexed out, that's a tough go. And especially if you get flexed like the earlier slate on Sunday morning too, or Sunday early afternoon, if you're on the East Coast, it's tough. But again, the NFL, it's the craziest reality show on TV. Get out of here, Bravo. This is it.
That's a very good point. Yes, I like that. All right, Haley Elwood, NFL sideline reporter. You're also doing some stuff for the NBA. You're just all around, and I love it. Thank you for joining me again, and we'll talk again next week. We'll see how things play out this weekend in the NFL, and we'll do this again next week. Thanks, Haley.
Sounds great, Stacey. Always great to join you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for listening, and thanks in advance for liking this podcast and leaving a review. Meet you here next week.